I'm Carol Cohn, and welcome to Purpose 360, the podcast that unlocks the power of purpose to ignite business and social impact. If I gave a theme to today's discussion on Purpose 360 with Carolyn Berkowitz, President and CEO at the ACCP, the Association of Corporate Citizenship Professionals, I would just say insight, insight, insight. Carolyn is going to share with us so many of the insights that they provide to members. And their members, over 245 companies, over 2,000 professionals. And these insights are something that any professional starting out in your career, middle of your career, or in the C-suite can activate your current work. It's a great conversation, so join me. Let's get started. So welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for that very generous introduction, but I look up to you for sure.
Oh, you're kind, but I just have to give our listeners a little bit of your background.
Yeah, great.
You have a great background. You were at Cap One for many years. I think 11 years or so. You worked on you're president of the foundation. You worked in public affairs, corporate citizenship. You've also worked on the nonprofit side to advance the practice. And you were at one of my faves, Points of Light. And so today we're going to get into how things are advancing, insights, the role of ACCP. So let's just start there. You just have brought so much to your leadership. Who is ACCP? What's your purpose? What's your vision? What's your mission?
ACCP advances the effectiveness of corporate social impact professionals. The way we do it is by sharing knowledge, by fostering solutions, practical solutions, and by cultivating inclusive and generous peer communities.
I love that you use the word generous and sharing. And so because the work we all do is so important, yet challenging, and we'll get into some of your predictions for 2023. Talk about fostering this community with generosity. How do you do it?
First of all, it is a small community compared to the larger corporate community. So there aren't that many of us out there that do this work day in and day out, do it really well, et cetera. And so there is not as much learning about the field as, say, a lawyer or an analyst in any company. There really needs to be that peer sharing for the learning that can be applied to your own company and your own circumstances to take hold. And so it's also a safe space. And we've really worked hard on that safe space so that our members trust us and trust each other to build relationships that will matter. And what we find is they've built relationships that last a career by being engaged with us.
For our listeners, if they're listening, well, we're not a member, but I want to consider this. Entice them to join. Let's do that right now.
We have all kinds of things for members and for non-members, frankly. But with membership, there's access to each of those communities, and the communities are, you can slice and dice them any way you want. So there's a foundation community or a technology community or an executive network. So, or a, pharma community. Like, you can get at it any way you want and be part of, as many as you want. So you have that intimacy of those small gatherings. You have access to our team, and our team has, more than 30 years of experience in this business and have worked in, 5 or 6 different companies that we bring to the table. And one of the things that I think is really different and welcomed is that we have individual coaching, research, almost consulting for every member. And so you can call and we can give you answers and we do the research for you.
And I want to call out to our listeners that you were so gracious to have me as a keynote this past year.
and access to people like you, access to experts and to, folks that are from different disciplines that motivate, where we can learn from other disciplines who are engaged in this kind of work. And we do it with the bent of practicality.
I love that. I love the bent of practicality. So let's get into some practical issues. So you use, and the whole field uses different terms. You talk a lot about CSR and ESG, in terms of products, services, knowledge, groups, etc. Can you just give a little bit of definition of the two, and in terms of how ACCP views them?
First of all, I think that folks use purpose and ESG and CSR or variations of them. Sometimes they use them interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable things, although they could be considered subsets of one another or, related. ESG is much more around how you do your work in terms of the environment, in terms of the social connection and society, and in terms of governance. So it's about both doing good, but more importantly, not doing harm. It's rigorous in a different sort of a way and more encompassing of the of everything that everybody in the company, in essence, works on. And CSR, or corporate social impact, is about the work in community and with stakeholders that improve their circumstances. I like CSR because I think it is encompassing. It might not be understood as encompassing, but I can think of no better way to say it than corporate social responsibility.
ESG, I heard it the other day from someone, value creation. How do you create value in the environment, society, as well as your governance is really what you are well governed. And I love corporate social impact because it's going deeper and it's having your impact. But I want to say to our listeners, what you should do, because the person you're talking with is coming into the conversation with a lot of background or not, or whatever, finance or legal or other ways, get aligned on the objectives of what you're trying to accomplish. What are your objectives? Who are your target audiences, especially via priority? And then, make sure the other person and you are in alignment, because, the acronym.
I think the names themselves, there's a dangerous pattern with names. So you see headlines like, the death of CSR, don't do CSR. And it's actually dangerous, because what they mean is, do the work more strategically or do the work in a way that's more aligned with the business. They don't mean, kill it. And so what I think is that the danger is that we lose ground because uneducated executives and CEOs sort of read it very literally, or it causes confusion and lack of alignment and lack of external support. And to me, it's just sort of attention-grabbing media tactics.
I want to shine a spotlight from where you sit, because you see so much great work. Who is doing it really well?
There are a lot of companies that are doing it well. There are a lot of companies that are doing something extraordinarily well, and maybe are, sort of middle of the pack on anything else. Two companies that I think are doing a remarkable job across the board are Walmart and Gilead Sciences. Actually, Walmart's work is groundbreaking, and it sort of became groundbreaking in response to real criticism about the company and its wages, et cetera. They've addressed those problems and they've gone much deeper. Walmart is well focused. They cover great dimensions of CSR and ESG. They're well resourced. They've developed a Center for Racial Equity that I think is one of the most innovative approaches I've ever seen, because they deal with issues like criminal justice, both internally and externally, both in their hiring practices and in their, in their external community partnerships. They are always business aligned. They use their assets. So they're a leader, for example, in disaster. They're in every single community and, with all kinds of supplies. And it's from top to bottom. The CEO leads and talks about their commitment to racial equity all the time. So I just think they're extraordinary. And they also have one of the most diverse CSR teams that I've ever seen.
And for our listeners, when we've done 30 pieces of research over the years, and Walmart came up in like the early 90s as the most well-known because they were advertising some of their social impact. But at the same time, because they did not respond to union criticism, they were the most hated company in the country.
Exactly.
But they made their strategic shift following Katrina when they had all of their trucks lined up, front to back, et cetera. And Lee Scott, who was the CEO, said they got fabulous exposure, great publicity, big pictures in the New York Times. And he said, I want to be like that every day. And that was the shift.
Gilead, their purpose is to create a healthier world. And they're the largest manufacturer of HIV and hepatitis medications, which leads to really interesting and brave work that they do. They happened to win our Purpose Award last year for team because they were innovative and inclusive, because they collaborated externally and internally, in really important ways. They really focus on LGBT issues and on supporting the trans culture, which many organizations do in their HR world, but they don't necessarily speak up and develop partnerships outside the company on that. They are brave. They had an issue recently where there was a rap artist who was bashing the gay community in lyrics. And they reached out and called him up and said, may we educate you? And they did so. And he is now one of the strongest and most outspoken artists. So there is that sort of bravery. They weave their social and environmental work literally into everything they do. They have this alignment with all dimensions. So the foundation partners with the chief medical officer and the universities. And so it's this cycle where the business reinforces their working community and their working community reinforces the business.
Do you know how much leadership their CEO provides?
Their CEO is extremely supportive. Their CEO is also brave, and their CEO really demands that they align with their customer, and who their customer is very often either someone from the LGBTQ community or even folks that are in the prostitution industry or other sort of,
I mean, but I want to make a comment about that because, and I want to make a quote about bravery because this is amazing. It's from Richard Branson. The brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all.
Exactly.
And that's Richard Branson. And I love that quote because, yes, they have products for HIV, but they're being very realistic and authentic about that community and leaning into it. And I think that's a great message and learning for anyone listening to this about, where do we play? Where do we invest if you're still grappling with that? And look at your core products, services, competencies, and don't be afraid to lean heavily into that. So that's wonderful. I want to talk a little bit about a fail or big challenges. Maybe you can talk a little bit, Carolyn, about a few of the predictions that are blinking lights, caution, caution. We're going into a turbulent economy, but how do we keep up great work and not fail?
I sort of think of failure in three big categories. One is under-resourcing. And that's not a failure of the practitioner generally, but you can't do much with that. I think scope creep, not staying focused and not connecting very specifically to the business and to the key stakeholders in ways that are differentiating is a fail.
I mean, I love that you talked about scope creep because we have a wonderful line and I give it to all our listeners. Focus is your friend. And consistency, if you decide to go down, if you're going to lean into HIV in that community, stick with it.
So last year, we had an uptick in headcount. It wasn't huge, but we had an uptick in headcount, and budgets were predicted to be flat. This year, technology is probably the loudest, but I'm starting to hear about the financial community as well. And budgets are flat or they are more limited because more budget is going to ESG measurement. And so they're having to do this additional task without additional dollars. So, that's what our members said last year and what I'm already seeing for this year. It's a bit of a slog. One thing that our members said is they expect the first half of the year to be difficult.
Okay, so I want you to give 2 suggestions. What are your suggestions to your members about how to deal with at least the first half of 2023?
So number 1, ruthlessly focus. Ruthlessly focus.
Ruthlessly focus.
Don't do everything. Think about fewer partners with larger amounts of dollars each, or, the things that matter most. Cut one of the ways volunteers engaged in favor of doing more and better on what they most respond to. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be honest and transparent. I had one member, actually a board member, who went to her leadership at the end of last year and said, look, this is what we'll cut, volunteerism or, this or this. But I think and she didn't do it with any emotion in her voice. And it was very practical, but it was also very clear we can't achieve what you expect. So stop being a hero and stop thinking that the kudos come from doing more with less, more with less, more with less, less with less.
Excellent. And without the emotion, here are the facts. So I want to talk a little bit about some other challenges because as you know, and as I discussed in my keynote for you, that we produced our 31st piece of research last year called Purpose Under Pressure.
Absolutely.
And it was a post-COVID investigation with both employees and employers. And the net takeaway, employees want more meaning, they want more belonging, but they also said C-suite gets it, HR gets it, but we found a huge gap with strategy and with marketing and with sales. Do you have any recommendations on how do we get to the strategy, marketing, and sales folks and bring them under the tent?
Yeah, I was most surprised by the lack of support from strategy.
Really?
From that study. Yeah. It hit the hardest because if the strategy folks don't buy in, then what? It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
What I think in this economy is that we need to be prepared to take a little bit of a hit. In KPMG's recent research, 59% of companies said they plan to pause or reconsider their ESG work. And in the same thing, 70% of those same people acknowledged that ESG improves financial performance, up 37% from the year before when they asked that same question. So they're mixed up.
It depends how much they're putting into operations because there's a lot of places for savings.
Yes. Yeah. So I think data and stories is really, really important. And that is a moniker for me that somebody taught me at the very beginning of my career. And I always say it to myself. You need to have data, and you need to have data that matters to the person you're talking to, whether it's the strategy person or the marketing person or the finance person. It's got to be in their language, and it's got to make a difference. It's got to be hardcore numbers. Then you have to also be able to tell the story of how what this is doing supports talent management or supports, a person, an example even. The stories need to come from your own world and from theirs. Look, there are going to be cuts and there's often nothing that we can do about it. But I think there are also ways to engage people and to show them where it's made a difference and a difference for them.
I want to talk about the big challenge in the room. I've gone to so many different types of groups, conferences and such that say, how do we measure the S?
So first of all, I think the S needs to be better defined. And right now it is defined by the data that folks have, which is diversity numbers and human rights commitments. It says very little about community change, about stakeholder improvement, if you will. And I think the best way that I can think of to make this change is to connect with the materiality issues that are most frequent and then name them as the S measures. Part of it is that we can't monetize the S. We also need to research, how much less government spend there is when this happens, or how much more opportunity we create, or how many new jobs we create, and how we prepare people for them. Or, I think being able to monetize it will help an awful lot. But the S issues, whatever they are more important to stakeholders than almost any other.
Yeah, and I can give a real specific there because there's one great program that Timberland ran, which is that run by Atlanta McElraith, who I adore, and basically they brought cotton farming back to Haiti from nothing, and they empowered smallholder farmers. They work with the government. They taught them how to create cotton, and then Timberland bought the cotton and put it into its products.
The results of things like that are, really do matter. And it's, we've got to get very serious about not just how many, things we did, how many people were trained, what they were trained to do, and what difference that is making or can make. Like, we've got to extend the story.
Yeah. I love your opinion on, we always work with our clients on employee turnover metrics. Because if indeed the purpose is being embedded and it's in DE&I and it's in innovation and it's in the career advancement, that there should be less turnover. And, also you should do the qual on the exit interviews and such. And so we say, really dive deep into what does it cost to replace an employee? What sort of client or customer relationships will you lose? Do you discuss that in your communities and such within ACCP?
We do. And there's new research from Benevity that says, and, I might get a slightly off, but basically it says for a certain group of employees that have been engaged in the CSR work or volunteering for 3 years, but are not, 20-year employees, being engaged with the work in community makes that group of people 50% more likely to stay. 50% more likely to stay. That's huge.
Yes, it is huge. And I have to say, even though we've got layoffs and such, that the war for talent is still there. It's never going to go away. And you also want to bring the full amount of a person's potential to their work.
And if they're not including a question about community in their all associate survey, they're missing the largest and most important source of information to make the case to their own leadership. So they've got to ask a question about it, and then they've got to cross-tab that question with all of the engagement levers.
And I would hope anybody listening, because we always have to beg to get one question on the employee survey. And I think that we need more of that because it's the human factor that we truly must gauge, measure, and enhance. So thank you for that. One of the issues that you are very, very forceful on in a good way is DE&I and racial justice. And I'd love you to talk about what you're doing and then how do you diversify the field? Because it's not easy.
No, it is not easy. We did a study that we started working on it in 2021. We published it mid-year last year. And the study was on advancing equity in the CSR profession. So we learned that, the prototypical company has a CSR department that is 75% white, and in some cases 100% white, led by a white woman, led by a white woman, and whose employees do not think that they can advance, especially the employees of color. And so, we have a problem. So the two things that we found in there was not just the composition of the team, but how different the experiences were between people of color working in the profession and white people in the profession. And so limited opportunities to advance, limited opportunities to break in, distrust of the sustainability of overall DEI efforts. And so if we are going to be a profession that thrives, the community is ultimately the audience that we serve. And so we need to be far more representative of the community to do the kind of work that will actually change equity outcomes. One of the things that we are doing about it right now, we are working to gather information. We are having focus groups with leaders and professionals of color. We are understanding their trajectory and what they think the root causes of some of this are, and with the intent to design programs and develop partnerships that will lead to a different pipeline into the profession. You can actually, work in this dimension, differentially investing in mid-level BIPOC professionals in CSR and really grooming for leadership so that on-ramp to leadership is moving, and then developing relationships with other organizations, universities, et cetera, that will own pieces of it, and not so that it is not just an ACCP initiative, because a field takes a long time to change. And it also requires the commitment of companies to do the work in understanding what it takes to change and changing it.
I want to talk about issues and this whole conundrum out there about woke capitalism. And that, so here we are, we're corporate social impact professionals per se, or ESG professionals, and we want to dig in on a social issue. There is pressure from employees for CEOs to respond to all issues. What advice do you give to your members where they're like, oh my God, they have to defend themselves? They're between the employees and HR and the C-suite. Which ones do we address in a public way, and which ones are, no, we're not?
I think the rule of thumb is to take a public stance when it deliberately strengthens the bonds with your customers and employees, and so that it matters to your business. One great example of that is New York Life, who takes a very outspoken position on gun control. And that's because gun violence is the leading cause of death for kids and teens right now, and they're a life insurance company. So it makes clear sense. It doesn't necessarily, although I have strong feelings about the issue, it doesn't necessarily help a company who is, operating in a very pro-gun state that has no connection in any way to that industry to do that. It has to matter, and you have to sort of choose carefully which ones. There are lots of companies. So one company that I know very well, thousands of employees signed a statement about the overturn of Roe versus Wade. And so the employees demanded that the CEO take action. And the CEO's response was to take action with his employees, but not to be outspoken about it in the world. It's a financial services company. It doesn't make much sense for their business to be outspoken about it externally. They stand to lose more than they stand to gain. But a key advocacy group is their employees. And so speaking out to employees and ensuring that employees have access no matter where they live is really, one way to do that. So, and not, they can't just get on the bandwagon because the criticism, they can't afford it. They've got to be able to substantively do something about an issue in order to speak publicly about it.
Great. So let me make a shift to communications writ large. What are some of the best practices your members are doing in communications, both internally to employees and externally to other constituents?
In terms of tactics, I think social media is critically important to get your story out, to use employee voices to get their stories out. I think that's number one. I think internally educating does so much for externally educating. I think you build champions and you build voices by having your employees really understand what you're doing. So one thing, it seems so simple, but one thing that our members just gravitated to on our community is one member that does an internal newsletter every month about everything going on in community that goes to all employees. And people are like, give me the template for that.
So create a storytelling culture.
A storytelling culture, and numbers and storytelling culture.
Let's talk about the skills. What are the skills that corporate social responsibility, corporate social impact colleagues need to develop so they are at their greatest level of effectiveness, and also that they can advance throughout their organizations?
I think that the skills for leaders are around confidence and expertise, but humility. I think for everybody, they need to learn the business of the business first. You need to understand how a company makes its money. And it's not always as easy as it sounds. And I think that's the only way that you'll be able to connect to the business strategy. It always has to connect to the business strategy. Every single thing you do, you need the skills of making those connections, connecting the dots. I think folks need to have strong EQ, self-awareness, empathy, self-regulation, social awareness. Executives and employees that want to do this work bring all of their complicated selves to the equation every day. And there's a lot of managing of that. And so people need to understand that really happens. I think being influential, making a clear business case and earning your way into the room, really, really matters. And I think speaking the language of both the community and the business, like being bilingual, is so important. And then I think finally, the willingness to build internal partnerships. You're never going to go it alone and get where you're going on that internally. Partner with HR, partner with government affairs, partner with marketing, bring these folks in, show them what you can do for them. You'll find money and you'll find opportunity and you'll find know-how in all of those pockets.
That's excellent advice. So we unfortunately have to end this conversation, but I always cede the last words to my guest. So Carolyn Berkowitz, how do you want to end this conversation today?
Folks need to always connect to the business and the strategy. No communication should leave that out. They call these things an elevator pitch for a reason, because when you're in an elevator with anybody, you ought to be telling them why this work matters. I think the idea of building champions or advocates all around the business. There are lots of companies that are building ambassador programs, and I think that and educating those folks and having them do some of the legwork, I think, is really important.
Super. I think we tried to take, years of wisdom in all your positions, and, your exemplary leadership of ACCP. So thank you again so much.
Thank you. And thank you to your listeners.
This podcast was brought to you by some amazing people, and I'd love to thank them. Ann Hundertmark and Kristen Kenny at Carol Cohn on Purpose, Pete Wright and Andy Nelson, our crack production team at True Story FM, and you, our listener. We love hearing from you, so please give us feedback. Let us know names of people you'd like to hear on a future episode. How about some new questions to ask? And also, please rate and rank us, because we really want to be as high as possible as one of the top business podcasts available, so that we can continue exploring together the importance and the activation of authentic purpose. We all know every company, every brand, every not-for-profit must define their purpose, refine it, and activate it, and evolve it over time, so it has the greatest impact on business, growth, and society. And by listening to these episodes and sharing them with your colleagues and talking about them, I want to inspire you to have an amazing answer to this question: what is the power of your purpose? Thanks so much for listening.